Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Uh, the future of work. Pause for a moment and look to my left. There's about 130 years of fantastic experience in dealing with C-suits, dealing with top-class talent, and of course, a lot of hard work that's gone into creating global organizations. We have people representing MNCs, a lot of advisory that's happened, and of course, a lot of hard work in what we think is the future of work. Let's start with Priyanka. Welcome.
Thank you.
And it's been an interesting 3 years over the past, since 2019, when we first bumped into COVID. And a lot of buzzwords have been thrown around. We look at flexibility of work, we look at the hybrid model. You have about 25,000 people working with you in Ericsson in India, and all of them are top-class talent. What has changed? Where do you think are the pain points? And what do you think is Ericsson headed for, say, in the next 2 years, as far as retaining this top talent is concerned?
Wow, that's many questions in one, Shell. So thank you so much. I'll make a bit of a start to contextualize pre and post-COVID, right? And lots of hype about hybrid working or embrace future of work or things have changed, from what they were to what they are. But Ericsson, we've been very clear that this is nothing new to us. We've always been embracing hybrid working. We've always had a model of remote service centers or competence centers. And we've leveraged competence sitting in one part of the world to the parts where we needed talent to come in and go, right? So very clearly, remote, hybrid, flexible has been the mantra that we've embraced for over a century. What we clearly believe now is the need to accelerate that a lot more. So the question is not about how do we approach it, the question is more about how do we increase and accelerate the speed at which we are embracing this. On top of it, how do we invest in the right ecosystem, infrastructure, and trust our people even more now than ever before. That physical presence in any way does not at all signify performance, right? So we are clearly differentiating that performance versus presence and what's important. And we've clearly defined that as an organization, we trust our people. It's important that when we're looking at performance, we offer people flexibility. We offer people the autonomy on how they decide the way they want to work. So as an organization, our talent strategy has always been very clear. It's about who we hire with attitudes, values, and behaviors. What do they deliver to the organization towards customer success? But where they work from and when they work is not really a point of contention or discussion at all. So overall, just summarizing, the best financial performing year for us was 2020, 2021. Right in the peak of the COVID, when everybody was working 100% remote. And we broke all records and all targets for our financial performance. So all these are biases and barriers which can be overcome if you trust, empower your people and embrace the new ways of working.
That's wonderful, and I'm sure India would have contributed handsomely to that profit.
Massively.
Ericsson, as a lot of people would know, makes India's telecom backbone. And they've done some fantastic job over the last 15, 20 years that at least I have tracked the company. We'll get in Dr. Rajan into this conversation. Dr. Rajan, you've been working in this field for the last 40 years with top talent across a lot of top-end corporates. I just wanted to understand what, according to you, is the future of work? We have automation, we have artificial intelligence at a time when there are very, very few job opportunities that are left when you look at 15 years ago. So do people really matter in this equation any longer?
Shail, people always matter. And there's no second thoughts about it. But talking of future of work, there's a concept called punctuated equilibrium. Essentially, it comes from evolutionary biology, where seemingly small and insignificant things keep happening till they all come together and it unleashes a transformation. I think that's really where the future of work is going. So there are three distinct dimensions. So if you look at the workforce itself, how it's evolving, how work is being done, and the nature of work itself. So there are three distinct dimensions. And if I take one quickly, Charles Handy, way back in '89, wrote The Age of Unreason. where he talked about the emergence of Shamrock organization, which essentially says there are three kinds of workforce that you're going to have. One is a permanent set of employees who are the core workforce. The other is temporary and contract employees. And the third are external consultants or contractors. Now, today, who you are has become less important than who will get it done.
Absolutely.
That's the first part. And the second part is in terms of where work is done. I mean, COVID has actually taught us that today workspaces can be very fluid. And physical and virtual, anytime, anywhere, has become a way of life. There is a third aspect, which is the nature of work itself, which, like you were alluding to, who will do, to how we will get it done, and where will it be done. So you're talking of technology, you're talking of artificial intelligence, you're talking about machines replacing hands at one end, and artificial intelligence perhaps replacing minds. I think that's the direction future of work is taking, Shailesh.
Oh, wonderful. We'll get Mr. Shailesh Singh into the conversation. He's been working with Max Life Insurance over the last 12 years and handles about 100,000 employees, whether that's full on the rolls or as people who work selling insurance to a large part of this audience. Mr. Singh, you and I were discussing how cultures across organizations matter and how it's very necessary in this day and age of nuclearization of families to have a culture which encompasses the entire organization. What are your thoughts when you look at Max Life Insurance as of now and what it was, say, a decade ago?
Personally, I've always been a big fan of culture. Culture, I've been a beneficiary and also been someone who's really deployed it as much as possible to achieve a whole lot of stuff that we've done as an. I find culture as a big multiplier of all that we want to do, actually. And oftentimes, especially in smaller new age companies, sometimes the importance of culture may not be fully realized and fully deployed. But for organizations that are tenured and have grown large, I have seen this multiply the efforts of what you want to achieve the moment you get everyone in the game. And I also must say at the same time that with age, technology may change. Technology may come and may go. There's some things that are going to stay and will continue to be big enablers of all that we want to do. Culture is one such element that is extremely powerful. And I often quote these lines, sometimes when I interact with my employee teams and, share with them. If you don't have culture, and how do you discern and understand, culture? तो एक शायर ने कहा है कि रास्ते जुदा जुदा हैं, मंजिल जुदा जुदा. जहाँ कल्चर नहीं होगा तो कैसा दिखता है वो? रास्ते जुदा जुदा हैं, मंजिल जुदा जुदा, ये भीड़ तो है मगर कारवां नहीं. और वो डिफरेंस ये है कि देखिए, there is difference between a crowd and a कारवां. You can gather, collect people, but when you stitch it together, when you integrate, when you bring it together and they work in a direction, that is the power of culture. And culture is always top down. So in Max Life, for example, for the large extended family that we have deployed culture top down. We start with leadership, the top team believing in it, talking about it, voicing it, messaging it, and every leader trying to become a general manager. And when I say that, please understand, there is a journey from a functional leader to an enterprise leader. And it's important for leaders to understand that journey, where they think business, think enterprise end to end. They no longer restrict themselves to their roles, to functional roles of a sales leader or a HR manager or a finance leader or any other role for that matter, any other function. They really think end to end. They think customer, they think market share, they think business financials. They think all aspects of business. And we believe in creating that culture where supervisors believe in this, live this, and groom their people. So we really believe in culture and supervisory anchoring of all that we are doing. We've been beneficial, particularly as a large enterprise. I think it's an extremely important to deploy culture and leverage it fully.
Wonderful. As you would have noticed, Mr. Singh really appreciates Urdu poetry. and the final word on this show will be his. But till that time is reached, let's get Prabir into the show. Prabir, you've been over the last 35 years, been on both sides of the table. I wanted to understand when you look at a C-suite today, when you hunt for a good leader to lead organizations of today and tomorrow, what are the 2 or 3 things that one should look at?
So I'll maybe take 4.
Wonderful.
Right? So you've said for today and tomorrow. So it's very important to remind ourselves that whether it's today or tomorrow, the C-suite will still be responsible fundamentally for 2 things in an enterprise. One is growth and the other is risk, managing risk. These are the 2 big jobs. Everything is kind of bundled under these 2. And therefore, for me, the first thing that I would love to see in a C-suite leader, and I love the way Shailesh said, this is an enterprise view. This is not a function view. This is not a geography view. This is not a country view. So the first thing that I believe is curiosity. The world is moving from VUCA to BANI. Everything is topsy-turvy. Is there enough curiosity in the C-suite leader to take a 360-degree view of what's happening around him or her? From there's agility and stuff like that will flow. So that's the first thing I'd look for. The second that I think is very important that I would look for in a C-suite, how creative and innovative and different thinking are you? The challenge is you have many, many people who are cookie cutters, but you do not find in the C-suite people who are thinking differently, who are willing to rock the boat. So curiosity and the ability to think innovative will be the second thing I'd look for. The third, I will, it's a non-negotiable, is I will look for courage, because the obverse of courage is vulnerability. You cannot be courageous in today's world and in tomorrow's world unless you're willing to be vulnerable, because you will never have all answers to every question. You don't even have every question. So I would love to look for, vulnerability, because that is what breeds courage. So that's the third set. And finally, at the end of the day, you're in the C-suite, you're in the business of influence. It's not about power, it's not about title. We've all carried, I think, sitting here, all big titles in our lives. But finally, when you don't have the title, you still have influence. So even in the C-suite, whether it's the internal world, the external world, in company, in industry, with consumers, global markets, I think C-suite leaders must be masters of influence, which is a separate subject of conversation. But these are the 4 things that at least I would look forward very, very seriously if I was picking my C-suite for tomorrow.
Okay. Priyanka, my next question would come to you. But before that, just an insight. This entire event that we see and the number of B schools that are mushrooming in India are actually just 10% of the total labor force that we have in this country. Priyanka, you represent the tech space on the panel. What are the 2 or 3 things that you see when you're trying to recruit a new engineer, especially a woman engineer, into Ericsson? What are the qualities that people should be either preparing for or which you look at when you try to hire somebody in Ericsson? You have about 25,000 people in India and about 100,000 globally.
Great question. I think it's a series of things, but if I was to pick up the top 3, Shell, to your question, number 1, I would say it's an open mindset. Clearly, people believing that they can achieve whatever they set out for, because that's what they're passionate about, that's what they want to do. And you're always encouraged to navigate your ways through to different turfs, functional domains, areas. And that open mindset is extremely important, where people take every opportunity, every situation as an opportunity and not as a challenge. And if it's a challenge, you know how to overcome it. So we just look at people with the right mindset, values, and behaviors. So that's one important criteria. The second thing I would say is somebody who's extremely curious about always learning. To us as an organization, and to me as personally as a leader, it's extremely important that you always decide to stay curious. And zero learning is zero tolerance, because the day you stop learning is the day you stop growing, evolving, and staying relevant for any company, any industry, any organization, right? So that's the second thing. And the third thing is somebody who's always voting and working towards collective success versus individual success. Because As individuals, like he said, it's a karma versus a group of people or isolated individuals, right? So for us, as long as you're working collaboratively towards collective success, you will make things happen. You'll move towards the set goal that the organization is aspiring for. The moment individual success takes precedence, it's going to be a short-term win, but not a lasting one. And the reason why Ericsson survived more than a century is because we've always valued and imbibed those cultural aspects, and we pride ourselves of that culture. So as a company, these are the three things. According to me, the last one would be somebody who clearly believes competence has to be invested in, both for potential and proven competence. Okay. So we always believe in that.
Wonderful. And again, like I said, this is about 10% of the labor force that we have in India. Dr. Rajan, I'll get you here. We have about, and this is of course about affirmative action, we have about 90% of the workforce in India, which is completely in the unorganized space. What do you think the steps the government should take, or private enterprise should incur to get this unorganized sector boom, like we've seen a rally in demand of extremely high tech talent? What should be the government doing?
We are sitting on I think this is our century. It is India's century. We are talking about 1.4 billion population out of 8 billion worldwide. 67% of the population is of the working group. And what is most fascinating is that a quarter of the world's workforce is going to come from India. So the question that you asked is extremely pertinent. On a more philosophical level, I am recalling Thomas Gray, who said, "Full many a flower is born to blush unseen and waste its sweetness in the desert air." I think it is very, very important for us to look at 4 or 5 fundamental levers to be able to ensure that we are able to tap the potential we have as a country. The first one, beyond doubt, is the ecosystem. Whether it is basic amenities, whether it is infrastructure, whether it is a basic foundation that we're able to create for people across the country. The other element in my mind is education, primarily primary and secondary education that serves as a foundation for the people who are going to be the future workforce. The third aspect is what I think the minister also was referring to, which is how do you create employability? So what kind of skills are required to make somebody capable of actually finding a job? The fourth element is employment itself. And India today houses 2 million enterprises, 63 million MSMEs. So how do you actually prepare people to be able to embrace the jobs that are going to open up? And the last one, which is even more important, is how do you mine the spirit of entrepreneurship in India? And I think we have always been a land of entrepreneurs. And how do you create jobs rather than seeking them? I think these are the 5 levers that are going to make a difference.
Wonderful. Let me get Prabir into this conversation. Prabir, like we discussed earlier, you straddle both the C-suite as well as a lot of advisory that you offer to startups. We've seen over the last 6 odd months, ever since that we've this funding winter afflict the unicorn space, there's a level of toxicity that comes into startups, especially when you talk about a certain level of employee trying to have a conversation with an extremely intelligent person who set up the startup. What have been your experiences there?
You see, entrepreneurship is a big virtue, but it's also a big curse sometimes. A lot of entrepreneurship, especially of the recent kinds, rests itself on a very strong left-brained bias. Very smart people, very intelligent, they get their algorithms right, they get their numbers right. So, full marks. But where I think that they are lacking, and it's at the cost of a generalization, so please permit me for that, there are honorable exceptions, I don't think they are adequately coached, developed, or naturally nuanced on the right side of the brain. And therefore, to me, when I meet startups or when I advise startups, I think there are 3 pieces which distinctly are falling apart. For me, all of them are in the realm of or they start with empathy, low empathy. Because if you're not able to empathize, maybe it is their experience, it's their wisdom, they're very bright and yet they haven't seen the world maybe, or maybe there is intellectual arrogance but the inability to take people along. So, you can mind the details of it, but low empathy. And when there is low empathy, many of these startups struggle with this issue of respect. They may not be meaning it, but it manifests itself. And especially since you talked about the funding winter, when the chips are down, it becomes more pronounced. And therefore, while business demands you to do knee-jerkism, there is a cost you pay eventually to the brand and to future possibilities. So that's the one piece about empathy and respect. The second that I feel many entrepreneurs, many startups are struggling with, they believe they know it all, or the risks are too many if I allow someone else to do it for me. Now the risk is you are the only genius, or I'm the only one who can get it right, which is not always true. We are all human beings. But what is unsaid as a behavior of an organization is empowerment becomes very limiting. Delegation is very limiting, and therefore trust levels fall down. They are not natural communicators. It's all about task conversation. So the entire issue of a trust collapse is inherent in the way the mind is wired when an entrepreneur starts on his journey. And the last thing, the belief that a startup is all about a certain valuation and certainly that pot of gold eventually, I don't think holds true. It doesn't sustain people, and data supports that. Otherwise, you wouldn't have seen attrition or people jumping from one to the other or moonlighting and stuff like that. I have been a very strong votary, even in my executive life, that don't let rewards take the place of appreciation. Rewards is a financial incentive. It matters. I'm not saying it doesn't matter.
So a pat on the back is more necessary.
But appreciation, real-time acknowledgement is non-negotiable. Unfortunately, I don't see that because, again, in the way they are wired, that doesn't come as a very natural corollary of their leadership experience.
I'm sure this is a learning curve, and a lot of startups are listening to what you say, and there'll be a major improvement. I'll get you, Dr. Singh, Mr. Singh, here in this conversation. We've seen a lot of automation that's happening in the world of HR when it comes to hiring, when it comes to retaining people. And of course, the two buzzwords are artificial intelligence and, of course, automation. When you look at an organization like yours, which employs about 100,000 people, how has life changed when it comes to hiring? And typically, what are the kind of highlights or points that you're looking at when you go out and hire people from B schools?
Okay. Let me take the last part of the question first, which is what we look for when we go to B schools. There's something that is sort of time tested that I have continued to deploy over years and worked well for me. And that is the frame of 4 E's. And I credit General Electric, where this is widely practiced. 4 E's is about, the first E is about energy. So when we look for leaders, emerging leaders, the first E is energy. Leaders, one of the biggest, most important traits of leaders is demonstrating energy. I mean, it's difficult to imagine a leader, who doesn't demonstrate energy. He may have all the goodness and all the potential, but if the person doesn't demonstrate energy, it's difficult to really infect others and lead forward. So energy. Second, energize. Ability to energize people around you. Inspire. Second important trait of leadership. So energy, energize. Third, edge. Sharpness. Clarity of thinking. For example, if a knife falls on the table, it must cut through. Shouldn't be blunt enough to just be lying there. So edge. And finally, execute. Really hit the ground running. Make things happen and not just conceptualize. So 4 E's is what we look for when it comes to B schools: energy, energize, edge, and execute. To the question. To the other part of your question, in terms of how are we deploying technology. So we deploy technology, and I'm going to simplify this for 2 primary purposes. One, for our customers, where it is really deployed well for learning from customers. For example, for our digital e-commerce channel, where we have different touch points, and we We learn from customers in terms of the feedback that we get at different touch points, and use those, including their searches, use those to deploy AI and innovate, improve our products on an ongoing basis, also learn their behavior in terms of the kind of questions that we get and the crawlers that are used, etc., on the websites, which is more in the, and similarly, this is also deployed for our sales teams, for them to understand customer behavior better and be able to embed these into these sales apps that we have for our employees, for the employees when they are selling. The second is the day-to-day work for employees in their life, whether it is the regular work in terms of your attendance, your appraisals, your pay slips, your day-to-day work, you're interviewing, scores and all of those. So we deploy in these. But having said that, I must, emphasize, while doing all of that, we really harp on keeping things simple. I am personally a big believer of, simplicity. And I get reminded of this quote from Peter Drucker, who said, there's no point in doing something perfectly that should not be done at all. So I'm really conscious of that. And our desire while deploying technology is really keep things as simple as possible.
Oh, wonderful. Priyanka, since you represent the tech space here, and we've seen an increasing number of women entering the world of coding, has it changed anything dramatically in the world of Ericsson when you look at hiring a woman? There has been an instance in the last 10-15 days, and it made a headline, that a lot of women employees at probably the world's, India's largest tech company resigned because they were made to forcibly come to the office. So how do you retain women talent, and what has changed there?
Again, I think women in tech is one of the biggest ambitions we are trying to work towards, and we are not under any illusion that this is going to be resolved with some small or mid-sized efforts. It's a constant effort that we need to put in, where every single person has to be behind that ambition of increasing the representation of women in tech. There are enough industry reports, lots of other data points that indicate there's a massive gap, right? Women in STEM, women in tech is a global problem and a gap that everybody has to work towards fulfilling. When I look at Ericsson's own narrative, we've been quite clear that we recognize the gap. We understand that there are illusions about women and men having different level of ambitions, but the reality is, as women go through their career progression, we start to see ambitions diminishing, not because of them lacking it, but clearly because they need the right ecosystem to support it. So we have to have a culture or ecosystem that breaks those barriers. Extremely important to recognize that women go through barriers at the organizational level, personal level, societal level, right? So we as an organization understand that we have to invest in it. And first and foremost is to have curated conversations with women in understanding what level of flexibility do they need, which maps to their life journey and specifically towards moments that matter. Once you make that investment and deal with the women workforce with empathy, so flexibility, empathy, two big things. If that's being led as curated conversations with women by the line managers, senior management, and the culture embraces it, there is no way we will lack commitment and loyalty from women. Because they will know that there are phases in time when the balance will have to tilt towards personal part of their journeys or their lives, and phases when the professional side will take precedence over the personal side. And to us, we have ERGs or employee resource groups called Women at Ericsson, where we create huge amount of empowerment for women. We hire almost 90% of our engineers from the campus as women. So we know that the only way to increase representation is to have a big influx of women at the bottom of the pyramid.
Wonderful.
And sorry, I'm just going to take two more sentences. And that really helps us to also be aware that in the middle and the top level of the pyramid, we will never get be self-sustained by just buying talent from the market. So we have to make accelerated investments towards the middle and the top level of the pyramid so that we start to see bigger traction and higher representation. And the last thing I would say is, as a culture, what's extremely important is we create that community, the safety net, and the support ecosystem that makes women feel that they will be supported. There should be no imposter syndrome. There should be complete elimination of unconscious biases. And women have to feel that this is the environment where they can thrive without compromising one part of their lives, which is personal or professional. We will always respect the balance, And we will always respect there will be phases that one part of the life will be important than the other. And with that mindset and dedicated investments, we are seeing a huge amount of traction of more than 30% representation of women across the levels.
Wonderful. We've touched upon the C-suite. We've looked at how women are hired. And since a lot of experience here talks about how global hiring is done, let's get back to the basics. I'll get you in, Prabir, here. If you look at Instagram, if you look at LinkedIn or any of the online platforms, you get a lot of advice which talks about how to present yourself to an interview board. Should you be on that board and a person from a B school comes in, whether it's IIM, A, B, or C, or the second rung or the third rung institutes, what are the 2 or 3 things that you would focus on? What are you actually looking at?
So I think a lot of ideas and questions have come from the answers from this panel, right? So I'll steal one from Shailesh. The first, very clearly, because in an interview there's only so much you can ask,
Yes.
is energy. If you can't sell yourself in that 10-minute, 20-minute, half-an-hour conversation, I won't trust you to sell the organization, its products or its services. So that is very important. The second that I would look for very clearly is imagination. I honestly think it doesn't matter what your grades were. It doesn't matter whether you know your maths right. All that is tested in universities. I would love to see how creative is your thinking. And thinking on your feet is one thing which actually helps build great companies. It's not necessarily all that we studied as an academic course. So these are 2 things, high energy and the ability to think creatively. These are 2 things I would look for in a youngster if I was interview.
Okay. Dr. Rajan, why don't you go back in time and detail to us what are the 2 or 3 things you would look into a youngster who's in front of you giving an interview to be hired?
I think Prabir rightly touched upon a couple of things, but let me share my own experience. And I have been a recruiter from business schools. I have passed out from one. And I'll share my own example of how we build the EY consulting practice. So when we go to campuses, we actually do a fairly good homework on everybody who's there much before we even visit. So we know who the toppers are, we know who are the guys who are doing well. So we spend about 25% of the time understanding the intelligence of the person, the energy, the imagination, all of those. But we spend 75% of the time to get a sense of what is the person's character. Does he have a client-serving attitude? Does he have a positive frame of mind? Is he somebody who can face adversity? And we do put a lot of pressure in terms of seeing how people respond, because providing solutions is not an easy business. And I think it is true for any walk of life, not just for consultants. So our focus really is on being able to actually shortlist on the basis of IQ, but really hire the guys on the basis of attitude and the kind of culture that you're trying to bring in. So a very important element when we actually get somebody on board is whether others in the organization would welcome you as one of the family. I mean, how do you get that sense? And Shailesh was referring to culture, right? So you need to find that kind of a fit.
Okay. Priyanka, would you want to take a shot on this one?
Sure, so of course, there are various filters that we would take when it comes to competence as well as areas of skills and that we need for the role. But what really becomes overarching for us, number one is the attitude, right? Are they bringing the right attitude with them? Whether it's energy, whether it's can do, can they really take on challenges? Can they have a mindset of walking to the uncharted territories? That attitude is extremely important. Number 2 is values and integrity. And I will not undermine this by 1%. You could be the best engineer in the whole wide world, the biggest architect, lots of patents and innovations to yourself. But if you don't walk the talk on integrity and ethics, there is no way they will make a cut with Ericsson. And the third thing, like I previously also said, extremely important because we pride ourselves of the culture that we have. And we've invested in the culture for over a century. So somebody has to be a very strong cultural match to what we want the individual to bring through, because we are confident we can invest in any individual with capability, and competence is a trainable part of the whole equation.
Wonderful. Shailesh, let's talk about disruption and the fact that post-COVID we've seen a lot of education being transferred to the likes of Google. You just Google everything and try and find out an answer. Well, The lady from the tech world says ChatGPT. How do you think this trend towards looking for wisdom being set in organizations? You and I were discussing it in the anteroom earlier about how wisdom gets transformed within organizations.
Prabir and the other co-panelists, Olive, I want to call out one, important trait which has not changed ever. And I go back to my GE days when one of my supervisors, early career, told me, Shailesh, enterprises or individuals, they always continuously must make efforts to expand. And there is a reason for it, and Prabir called out growth. They must expand because in life, for individuals or for enterprises, if you don't expand, you don't have the choice of staying neutral. You shrink because everyone else is expanding. Everyone else is expanding. So if you do not make the efforts to expand, you don't remain static or neutral. You just shrink. You cede space. You become smaller. Now the big question is how do you expand? To expand, you have to learn. You have to develop edge, whether for enterprises or for individuals. This is as simple as this. And therefore, continuous learning, I think, is an extremely important trait that has been applicable ever, and continues to be extremely applicable, even today and going forward. Now, the form of that may change a little with the advent of technology and fast pace at which things are changing. It actually becomes all the more important. But to not get disrupted and to stay aligned and tuned, remain a learner, I think remains at the core of it. So I think that we all must realize that we embrace, and we deploy technology to an enterprise ask or to our own individual ask. But the core remains, learning remains important to be able to get the full potential, because things will change. They could change faster or slower, but they will continue to change. So I think that to me has remained as a core learning ever, all the time.
Wonderful. We are just about running out of time. And the last word goes to Dr. Rajan. Dr. Rajan, you've, in the world of HR, been known as the alchemist of happiness. Where do you think is the future headed when you look at work from today's standpoint?
There are two different parts part of the question. One, if you're talking of happiness, I think, there was a time when we were talking about employee satisfaction. We moved further and we looked at employee engagement. And I think a time has come, especially from a context of future of work, you need to embrace happiness at work. And the primary difference between engagement and happiness, in my mind, is that when companies are looking at employees as saying easy engaged, when you're talking of happiness at work, you're actually flipping the question the other way around, and you're asking the employee, what is it I can do to make this a happy workplace for you? So there is a fundamental difference, and there are 4 tenets which I think are at the core of creating a happy workplace. How do you have inspiring and caring leadership in the enterprise? Are your practices progressive? Are you in a position to actually create autonomy and you're able to empower growth? And the 4th very important lever is personal fulfillment. So a lot of times when we look at the world of HR, we are worried about the future that's going to unfold somewhere down the line. But I think the key to it is to be able to live every moment right. And a collection of that is what will actually create the future. So I'm reminded of wonderful words of William Blake from Auguries of Innocence. To see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wild flower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. That I would be...
Wonderful. And since we are talking about poetry here, Shailesh is a classical Urdu poet. I'll leave it to him to finish the show, and the couplet should encompass what we've seen so far in life and where are we headed.
Thank you, and I'll try and capture the sentiment in these lines where this poet says, "Wo chal chal," and this hopefully will relate this to culture and the importance of culture that we all talked about. वो चाल चल की उम्र खुशी से कटे तेरी, वो चाल चल की उम्र खुशी से कटे तेरी, वो काम कर की याद तुम्हें सब किया करें. वो चाल चल की उम्र खुशी से कटे तेरी, और वो काम कर की याद तुम्हें सब किया करें. जो जिक्र हो तेरा तो हो जिक्र खैर ही, और नाम तेरा लें तो अदब से लिया करें. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. On this note, we'll end this wonderful show. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise, thank you for being a great moderator.